walk to sustain our Great Lakes. And I'm also a conservation biologist for Waukesha County Parks and Land Use. I really wish I could be joining you live this evening, but I'm not, sorry to say. I'm actually up on Lake Superior in Pictured Rocks at the time that you'll be watching this, but I was looking forward to talking about, fall migration and what everybody's been seeing lately. So hopefully I'm catching some good birds up there on the shores of Lake Superior, but I am still very pleased to be able to be delivering this presentation to you about the walk. It's crazy to think about it, but it's been 3 years officially as of maybe 5 days ago since Alyssa and I, who is pictured on the introductory screen here, slide with me, finished the walk. We walked from downtown Milwaukee all the way up to Lake Superior, a total of 343 miles as part of a project to bring attention to Great Lakes conservation and conservation related issues. And we also have a feature-length documentary that's coming out very soon about our journey and the issues that the Great Lakes still face today and our freshwater resources still face today. So I'm very excited that that should be on its way to Madison for sound editing as we speak right now. So hopefully you'll be able to view that film here soon. But I will dive into the presentation now. The talk that I'm going to give this evening really covers a lot of, it's kind of the story of what led us to taking the journey to walk across the state and through the UP to Lake Superior, but also what we learned in general, not just about the Great Lakes, but what we learned about conservation and the importance of how we communicate science to the general public and hope to influence change. Because prior to doing this project, I really didn't have a full understanding of how much of an effect we as individuals can have with our action and with our voices in the conservation community. So I'm going to dive right in at this point. As I kind of mentioned, I am a conservation biologist, and I joke that that's a profession you go into in science when you just can't make up your mind about anything. You're interested in every taxonomic group that's out there. And so as a conservation biologist, I've spent well over a decade now studying wildlife, conducting habitat restoration. I did that in Milwaukee County for 7 years, and I'm now in Waukesha County leading the same type of programs and projects, but a big component of my job has been incorporating the community into our scientific research as well as restoration projects. But that has been something that I've dedicated my personal life and my professional life to for some time, but nothing ever really amounted to the level of the Walk to Sustain Our Great Lakes was the first outreach, and I would say passion project that I ever picked up. Alyssa and I were not paid to do this project. We used all of our saved vacation time and overtime to take the month that it took to walk those 343 miles off to complete it. But the environment is definitely a very big component of my day job, you could say. I often get asked what ultimately led to my having an interest in the environmental field. How did I know that I wanted to be a scientist or be a biologist, work in science? And I used to be a little bit puzzled by that question when I would be asked it, because I always kind of felt like it was innate. I had always loved being outside in the outdoors with my knee-high socks and really bad bangs and haircut. Thank you, Mom. But I'd always loved being outside, digging around, exploring in nature. I was fascinated with animals. But it wasn't actually until a couple years ago when I was giving a keynote speech at a conference actually about the walk and about my career in conservation thus far that I remembered there actually was an instance in my life when I was younger that triggered my having an interest in pursuing a career in science in particular. And appropriately enough, that had to do with birds. So I think you will all appreciate this story. So fast forward from the denim shorts and bad bangs. I still have the bad bangs here, but I was in grade school at this time. I grew up in Miami, Florida. So this was 3rd grade, I believe. And one year at recess, we had a sand playground at the school. One year at recess, these birds showed up on our playground. and they would nest or burrow in the sand. Now, all of us kids just called them playground sandbirds, but it turns out they were actually burrowing owls that showed up on our playground. And I was absolutely fascinated with the owls. Like, I would just sit at recess and I would watch these owls. My mom has my school like composite notebook, and I would draw sketches of the owls and what they were doing every day when I saw them. So I was very intrigued by them. Unfortunately, my classmates were intrigued by them in a different way, where it became a game to harass the owls and, in a sense, play whack-a-mole with them, where they would try to bury them in one entrance of their burrows to scare them out of the other. So it was awful, and I was very upset by this. So I went home to my mom one day and I told her about these owls, and I told her what was going on with the other students, and I asked her, what can we do about it? So she hopped on the computer. At the time it was dial-up. I still remember dial-up. And she looked up what these owls could be, and it turns out that they were burrowing owls. And at the time, they were actually a state-listed species in Florida. I think they're threatened species now, so the picture hasn't really gotten better for them, but they were listed as species of special concern. And so she printed out some Google Scholar articles for me about burrowing owls. She arranged for me to meet with the principal of the school, and I had my notebook and I had my printouts from Google Scholar, and I talked to the principal about it, and he actually agreed to provide me with $100 to go out and use that to help fundraise for fencing and signs about the owls in the playgrounds, to hopefully not only protect them, but educate the fellow classmates using the playground. So that was awesome. And we actually got fencing built, and the owls raised young on the playground that year. And they came back every year that I was at that school, which was for 3 years after their arrival. And they nested within that same burrowing complex within the area that we were able to fundraise enough money with the help from the Humane Society to be able to put up these fenced areas around their nests. So that was a moment in my young life that was absolutely, it was a triggering moment, just kind of a light bulb moment that, wow, I was able to help this animal that I was fascinated by using this data that Mom helped me find online on Google Scholar. And I thought, that's just awesome. That's what I want to do the rest of my life. While it was a great experience, I think it also naively made me believe that everything would be that easy. That when you have data, everyone's going to believe that it's factual and it's true, right? Wasn't always the case. So I continued in my young adult life to have an interest in science, but in my mind, it was, scientists were, these nut jobs in their white lab coats, off in the back, or I was going to be somebody who was off in a distant preserve working on endangered species, and I'd never have to interact with people. I would just be out there helping wildlife and preserving habitat. But I think we all can agree that science is much more than that. Conservation is much more than just the species we're trying to protect. People are very much a strong element of that. And I came to realize that when I was in high school. I kind of had a reality check moment. And I had just watched a documentary that we all may know. It's called An Inconvenient Truth. It focuses on climate change and the impacts of climate change and what may be to come if we don't take immediate and serious action about it. And so I watched this documentary, and every week in our civics class for high school, we were asked to come in and present on a current event or a current issue that we as young students could influence change upon or take action on. So I thought, of course, climate change, this is something we can all take part in helping to address and solve, right? So I did my report, my presentation to the class, and on my weekly report card, on my issue I presented, the teacher told me that I was no longer to present on political propaganda as part of my report in civics class. So I was very much taken aback by that feedback from a teacher that I had at the time. And I didn't understand, because I had data that I had used. I referenced a documentary, but that just led me down the Google Scholar rabbit hole with more information about it. So I kind of realized then at 15 that when it comes to science, communication is absolutely, it's invaluable. You have to know how to communicate the information and make connections to people for them to really appreciate how it impacts them. And so with something as complex as climate change, I realized, you know, it's not going to be easy, and I need to learn how to be an effective communicator when it comes to science and conservation related issues. So that's how I felt at the end of my report. I forgot that this picture comes up. I apologize. But after I received that feedback from my teacher, that's exactly how I felt. But this is what really drove me to pursue that avenue of conservation biology that afforded me the opportunity to work with people. By no means did I envision myself being a biologist that worked as much with the general public and with people as I do now, but I'm extremely happy that that is a large part of what I do today, because I think people do care about these issues. It's just a lot of people don't understand how it affects them and how they can have an impact on being a part of the solution. So engaging people in science is of the utmost importance, in my opinion. And so that's what most of my career to date has been. And then fast forward a little bit further to the year the idea of the walk came to me. So at this point now, I spent 12 years working in southeastern Wisconsin as a conservation biologist. And in 2017, I decided I was going to maybe try and have an impact on something a little bit bigger than just a local park system that I work for. And a series of events had ultimately led me to the idea of doing something like the Walk to Sustain Our Great Lakes. So I'll just touch a little bit on that. The main one was I had read Dan Egan's book, The Death and the Life of the Great Lakes. So this was, as a biologist, to read a book about the Great Lakes that I thought I was somewhat informed on, completely eye-opening. And I strongly encourage anyone who hasn't read this book to read it, because, as I mentioned, someone who thought they were informed, I was completely taken aback by not just the issues that we face today with the Great Lakes, but some of the things that are coming down the pipeline that the Great Lakes may face in the future. So this book really, really rattled me in a good way. And then at the same time, we had also entered, the Trump administration had just come into office, and there were a lot of proposals at the time to, one, completely slash funding to the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and two, significant cuts at that time, over 30%, to the Environmental Protection Agency. So there was a lot going on at the start of 2017, centered around the environment, centered around the Great Lakes. And so I was feeling really kind of invigorated to want to do something at the time. But one of the biggest things that led to it, I'll mention that in a second, but I should mention Dan Egan's book. One of the quotes that really stuck with me, and it couldn't be more true, is the biggest threat to the Great Lakes right now, and I think conservation and the environment in general, or you could say any main issue today, is our own ignorance about issues that are out there. So some of the things that we cover in the documentary that I don't go into much detail as part of this presentation. So this is, I guess you could say this is at this point a shameless plug for the film. But if you watch the film, we go into a lot more detail on this. But invasive species in the Great Lakes, and you're an audience that I'm sure I don't have to define any of that to, but over 180 non-native species in the Great Lakes that have come in through ballast water on cargo ships. And we still have not figured out a efficient, effective way to stop that from happening, yet it causes us millions of dollars, over $200 million worth of mitigation and control and damage money and funding every single year in our region. Harmful algal blooms. This is something we experience in Lake Erie almost every year, Green Bay every year. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but these were things that, you know, we don't think about every day, but the largest freshwater system on the planet sits right at our fingertips here, and they're very much affected by these issues, and we are a part of these issues. So I was very much awoken by that. And that, in addition to all the cuts to the agencies that were being proposed that helped to address those issues, I was in line at a Starbucks in early 2017, and there was someone another millennial in front of me. And at that time, the proposed cuts to the environment, the EPA and GLRI locally were on the news a lot. So a lot of people were talking about it, which you could definitely say is a positive thing. But two girls my age were in front of me, and one of them said, I don't even know why we're making a big deal out of the EPA. All they do is force us to get our emissions tested on our cars. And I just, even like repeating that sentence just frustrates me a bit. So obviously I was frustrated by hearing that. And I didn't say anything at the time when those individuals made that comment, but I didn't say anything because it didn't surprise me to hear it, number one. A lot of people, especially in my generation, and for sure younger at this point, it is not tangible to us what things were like pre-EPA, pre-Clean Water Act, pre-Clean Air Act. We don't remember the times. Like, we look at old historical archived images like this and think, wow, that looks awful. But it looks awful, but a lot of us can't connect to that. And that's not an excuse for the ignorance of statements like I just reiterated, but it does help you understand we have a lot of education to do here, especially when it comes to the younger cohort that's, they're going to the polls next. They're potentially the next working biologists for all we know. It's very important that we understand how far we have come in order to appreciate what we've done and where we need to go in the future. So I left Starbucks that evening. I'm in the car. I'm really just fired up, had just read Dean Egan's book. All of these proposed cuts are coming out from the from the Trump administration, and just heard that comment. So I'm aggressively drinking my caramel macchiato, and a song comes on the radio, and it instantly makes me think of one of my favorite movies and a scene from one of my favorite movies. And I know you all know this individual. Forrest Gump. And I wish it's not just a joke I put in this presentation, but the idea for the walk really did start with Forrest Gump. But that scene in Forrest Gump where he's running back and forth from the East Coast to the West Coast, and eventually a lot of people join in with him. And everyone in the movie asks him, "Why are you doing it, man? Why are you doing it?" And his response was, "I just felt like running." But I thought if I did something like this, I would have a response. People are fascinated or intrigued when individuals do something that's perceived as being out of the box like this, right? And then I got to thinking, well, aside from Forrest Gump, there are some very much real life examples of people who have run or walked for causes and causes related to the environment. A couple you may know, one of them being Bill Miller, who walked across the southern portion of Wisconsin for bird conservation as part of the Great Wisconsin Birdathon. Grandmother Josephine, who recently passed away. She's a Anishinaabe grandmother. She had walked around all of the Great Lakes 8 times to bring awareness to clean water and the importance of clean water and the importance of the Great Lakes. So walking for a cause was nothing original that I was thinking of, but it's absolutely effective, and it's not something everyone can do or take the time to do, but I decided that year in 2017 that this is what I was going to do. And originally I was going to try to walk around all of the Great Lakes, but I couldn't get enough time off feasibly. So it was shortened. And I came to work one day. I was working at Milwaukee County Parks at the time, and I told my coworker about this idea that I had to bring attention to all of the important work that's been done through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and thanks to the Environmental Protection Agency and the efforts of local conservationists, but then also paint the picture of the issues that are to come and why we still need to invest in restoring our freshwater resources in the Great Lakes. So that's Alyssa there. She brought me back down to reality and told me we can't walk around all 8 of them feasibly, but maybe we could do something. We can walk from our home Great Lake, Lake Michigan, all the way up to the largest Great Lake, which was Lake Superior. And so that's where the idea for the Walk to Sustain Our Great Lakes came to be. So we planned it out, and route planning was the most labor-intensive portion of this project. We don't have a through hiking trail. We have the Ice Age Trail in Wisconsin, but it was very important to us when planning the walk that we stayed within the Great Lakes Basin, because we wanted to bring attention to these issues with the communities that have a direct effect on those tributaries, rivers, streams, and the lakes directly within the basin. So our route had to be planned within that, and we successfully planned it. That took about 3 months, but we stayed on interurban trails. We did some of the Ice Age Trail, and then there was some state trails, and then the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest has a state trail that runs through it, and Forest Service roads in the UP. And we finished in the Porcupine Mountains. And you can see we did cut inland, and that was very much intentional. So we only spent, we were on the Lake Michigan lakefront side in Green Bay and then at the start, but we cut inland for the majority of it because as you'll see in a slide or two, we did outreach events throughout the communities that we stopped in. And one of the biggest issues we were trying to bring attention to and awareness to was non-point source pollution. So people who tend to live right on the Great Lakes, they're aware of them, they think about them pretty regularly, but when you live inland several, miles, you don't see them every day, you're not as likely to think about, oh, this fertilizer I put on my lawn, where does it go? So that was part of the reason we went inland there. But we also wanted to, in addition to doing the physical walk, decided, well, maybe we can make this into a fundraiser. So we aimed to fundraise for conservation organizations. We selected the Urban Ecology Center, which is where I had my first internship. So they're near and dear to my heart. And Discovery World, and then the Alliance for the Great Lakes was the third organization that we decided to fundraise for. And then, as I mentioned, we did outreach in the various communities that we walked through. So that was all planned before we started the walk. And this is what I mentioned with non-point source pollution. So this was the biggest portion of our outreach because I think it's one of the most complex issues for the general public to understand. I mean, it's complex even to a person in science. And it's also something that anyone you talk to can have an impact on and make change on, because what you do on your lawns is part of non-point source pollution. So everything from fertilizers, anything that runs off of the landscape within the Great Lakes Basin ultimately can make its way into the Great Lakes, into the Milwaukee River, through the Milwaukee River into Lake Michigan. So we really aimed to talk to community members about that and bring attention to that, because it's not as simple in this day and age where you've got industry on a river polluting into the river. The EPA, we've done a great job in addressing that as a whole, as a country. But the non-point source pollution issue is much more complex. And it's not as crystal clear. So to educate the public on this was of high importance to us. Excuse me. And then we thought, in addition to fundraising and walking, maybe we should do a YouTube series or something on the walk. Not just to showcase the landscapes that we were walking through, but also we could, as we're stopping in these communities, we could meet with community members and land managers, researchers that are all working on Great Lakes conservation projects and interview them, educate people about all the important work going on in the Great Lakes region and what has been done, but then also talk to the experts that know what's going on when it comes to the future threats that the Great Lakes face, and turn this into a YouTube series. Excuse me. I got a frog in my throat so bad. Never happens when I give a live presentation, but pre-recorded. So it at first was the idea to do it as a YouTube series. I've never made a YouTube video in my life, but we had posted an outreach, something on social media, where I asked if anybody knew, excuse me, someone that I could get a GoPro camera from. And then I got linked up with someone who ultimately went to my high school and now owns a film production company. We sat down and had a meeting. And when I mentioned to them what we were doing and why, they were completely awestruck by it and by the issue. And they offered to create a feature-length documentary film completely pro bono with all of their nice equipment and all of their film crew members. So we spent the entire 6 months leading up to the walk, probably when we should have been training our bodies for this endeavor. We were filming interviews all across the Great Lakes Basin. So we were up on the Cat Island chain, talking with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service about the piping plover nesting success up on the Cat Island chain in Green Bay. And we were at the School of Freshwater Sciences here in Milwaukee. We were out in Ohio talking to the Ohio Sea Grant, or the Stone Laboratory, excuse me, how they're engaging farmers in implementing practices that will help with non-point source runoff from their fields into Lake Erie that are ultimately helping contribute to these harmful algal blooms. So we were all over the place, gathering this information, turning it into interviews to incorporate into this documentary. And they also came along every couple of stops on the walk. They would meet with us, film us hiking, and one of them even came the last 2 weeks. He hiked the entire 2 weeks at the end with us. I give him props. But our ultimate goal, in addition to the film, when we started the walk, we weren't just about hiking. We had planned, I'm so sorry. We had planned so much outreach ahead of time. So we spoke, our first public outreach event on the walk was actually up at Kohler Andre. So the entire campground came and heard us talk that night after we had walked in. It was a great experience, but in the pictures from the event, you can tell Alyssa and I just want to keel over because our feet hurt so bad. That was a 20-mile day, but we had a good turnout, so it was worthwhile. But we did, even before the walk, day hikes throughout southeastern Wisconsin. We had looked up areas where Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding at the time that was being proposed for complete elimination, areas that had been restored from brownfields or Superfund sites, highly toxic contaminated sites that you couldn't do anything with without the restoration work that occurred. We brought community members out to those areas and talked about the process, what had been done there, and look at how it's been revitalized because of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, because of funding and work that came through the Environmental Protection Agency. So we did that all throughout southeastern Wisconsin. And then during our walk too, that bottom picture on the right side there, that's the Popple River Pub up in, that was along the Nicolay State Trail. But a lot of our education that happened during the walk happened in pubs. It kind of at times felt like an extended pub crawl, but you need water to make beer, so we didn't really feel too guilty about it. But we talked to so many people in all of these establishments that we stayed at, and so many people offered us, a place to sleep at night or a warm meal when they heard what we were doing, which was just awesome. The kindness of people I wasn't expecting it, and it was really amazing. And then we were really connected on social media too. These videos are all still up, but we tried every week to post a video talking about different Great Lakes topics, what we had seen, our perceived bear encounters in our tent when they were actually just deer outside of our tent. But Alyssa's first pileated woodpecker, you can see that on there. I filmed her reaction. She had a lifer pileated woodpecker, which was really exciting. But we were constantly connected, which is not the easiest thing when you're doing long hikes. I've done a lot of backpacking in my life, and sometimes when you're just having a rough day out on the trail, the last thing you want to do is be filming yourself and talking about something that requires a higher level of thinking. And so it was rough, but it was well worth it, because this wasn't just for fun. We wanted this, we had a cause we were walking for, and we needed people to know about it. And as we were walking, we also met with lots of news outlets. There was a lot of print media that covered us as well, continuing to get the word out about the fundraiser, what we were doing. So we just had a lot of really awesome coverage. We even had several care packages sent to us. That picture where we're in the grass on the ground with the blanket, that's from Prairie School in Racine. We had talked to their class before we left, and those kids are smarter than most adults when it comes to Great Lakes conservation issues. I was really impressed by them, but they sent us a care package and a bunch of letters asking us questions about the trail and Great Lakes issues. Excuse me. And a lot of what we did, and almost every bit of outreach that we were doing, our goal was to just give people, even if it's just one small seed that you can plant about what can someone do related to this environmental issue that you're trying to educate them on. Even if it's something so small, it can still make an impact. We do have some major changes to make, and we have a lot of work to do, but for some people who it's completely unfamiliar to, or they haven't thought about these things ever really in their life, one step forward, no matter how big, is at least a step, and we have to get, that's what will get us there in the long run. But one of the things we really tried to encourage people to do was to think regionally, areas and streams, and act locally. It can be, especially with environmental issues, especially with things like climate change or just the Great Lakes as a whole. They're massive things, massive issues. We have a lot to overcome, like I said. But people can get very easily discouraged by that. Think, well, how am I going to have an impact on something that's that complex or that large? You can think big, but you can act small though. You can act locally, act in your front yard. Just do one thing that could make a difference. So that could literally be, and these come from conversations I have with my parents, honestly. It could just be, do you really need fertilizer on your lawn? Get it tested. See if you actually need to be putting that down, because that leaves your lawn, that goes someplace. When you're landscaping, and I am preaching to the choir with this group, I know, go native. That makes a big impact. Picking up trash, personal waste. I mean, don't use anything with microplastics in it, even though that had been banned. But bigger things that you might see, like a bottle, eventually breaks down into a microplastic. So while microplastics have been banned, large pieces of plastic over time turn into microplastics. So picking up trash seems simple, but yes, it makes a difference. A huge one too, when it comes to addressing non-point source pollution, is preserving and stewarding local green spaces and wetlands, those buffers to our larger waterways, our larger wetland systems. This is huge. So for any of us, that could be, you could be calling in to your representatives, your elected officials, letting them know, I care about this, I care about conservation, I want to see it invested in the community that I live in. As someone who has worked for government entities most of her career, that makes an impact. Write in, call in, we are the constituency, voice what you want to see done. And that can go a long way. Conserving water, it seems simple, but that's something too that we stress. When we did a lot of outreach in the Milwaukee area, anywhere where there's potential for combined sewage overflows through our sewage treatment systems, as simple as don't do your laundry on a day where it's been raining all day. That's a big thing you can do right here, in the Milwaukee region and Southeast in general. So just be wise with small decisions like that, and that can go a long way as well. And spread awareness. If you're educated on any of this, talk to people about it. I think that goes a long way, and talk to people about it in person. You can share a lot of information on social media and through the web, but spreading your knowledge and expressing that you're passionate about something, it can go a long way when you're interacting with people in a face-to-face interface. But educate them on things like this, things on this slide right here. These are little things that people can do. And we eventually too, there was one day that we had all of a sudden our trailer for our documentary, the views went up on it by almost 100,000, and we didn't know why. But it turns out Mark Ruffalo, who's an actor, and he played the Hulk, and he's also a Kenosha County native. He's from Kenosha. He happened to share one of the interviews that we did, and so then a lot of people were directed to our page. So maybe we'll be lucky and he'll come to the premiere for our movie if we ever have one. But that was definitely helpful in getting the word out. So here are just some pictures that we usually like to show from the trail a little bit. We had a send-off event on the top left there. That's at Discovery World. We had just over 100 people show up to our send-off event back in 2017 on August 26th when we left. Discovery World hosted a big event for us, and most of everybody first mile with us, which was great. Blisters were a unfortunate and unwelcome friend that we had along the trail. Alyssa had them pretty bad, but that's her foot there. Duct tape does solve everything. So you just put some duct tape on it and you're good to go. Donation wise, I'll mention how much we raised here shortly, but we received so many donations on trail because there's not many people who are backpacking across Wisconsin. So when we made it onto the news and word had gotten out about what we were doing, because we had tried to push it out so much, everybody knew, are you those two girls that are walking for the Great Lakes? And we would say yes. And people who, you could tell that they don't have, money falling from the trees in their lives. They would still give us money. And it was just awesome. And sometimes they would say, here, this is just get yourself some Gatorades, or, grab yourself a bite to eat with this. And it was just, it meant a lot. We had about almost 2 weeks straight of rain out of our 4-week endeavor. It was fall in Wisconsin, so you can expect that, I suppose. But for the most part, it was really beautiful weather. I remember thinking that picture at Kohler, I remember thinking we had made it so far when we got to Coler Andre, and then you think how far you have left to go. Like, oh, we're going up to Lake Superior. I don't know why I'm so excited to be at Coler Andre, but it was quite the feat. I mean, to think you walked there is pretty exciting. We met a lot of cool people along the way. The second I got to Michigan, I of course made sure I was always wearing my Packers attire, my Green Bay Packers attire, once I crossed. We had a lot of people join us along the way too that would walk a couple miles with us here and there if they could arrange to meet up with us. Just a beautiful state though. I always get asked when people hear that I'm from Florida, why didn't you go back? Weren't you dying to go back? And I'm like, no, the Midwest is just so gorgeous. And just some of these pictures, you can see why it was amazing to just walk across Wisconsin, starting in an urban landscape and going all the way up to the UP. You got to see everything that Wisconsin is, essentially, at least on the east side. Excuse me. The day we made it to Michigan, down there in the bottom picture, that was probably my favorite day on the trail. That was when it felt real that we were going to finish and we were actually going to make it to Lake Superior. I had some really bad ankle issues. I think I was getting tendonitis in my Achilles tendon from starting hiking in boots, and I should have been in just running shoes, honestly. So I didn't, by High Cliff State Park, which is, oh my gosh, I think it's near Fond du Lac, but I thought I might be having to tap out, and I was really upset about it, but I didn't. I actually got some advice from someone who was following on our page that's a physical trainer, and she gave me some advice on what to do, and I did it, which was mainly just shorten my stride and go slower, tape it, ice it. It was hard to go slower though, because Alyssa and I were very competitive, and I didn't want to be 20 feet behind her the entire time, but I did it for my ankle, and we made it to Michigan, and then it became a real thing that we were going to finish. But this is why the Midwest is just gorgeous, because we started in late August and finished up in the UP in mid-September. We got to see just the start of color change. The aspen were starting to go and the maples were going too, but it was just beautiful. In the bottom right there is Alyssa on our last day up, that's Lake of the Clouds in the Porcupine Mountains. We had not seen Lake Superior yet to that point. We didn't see it. The way the film crew had planned our route at the end, we didn't get to see it until the trees parted and we were finally at Lake Superior, but we're very excited at the finish line to finally get there. So we had done the 343 miles. We did extra when we were there because we were a little shy of our fundraising goal at the finish. So we decided that we would just keep walking and doing trail until we hit our goal. We ended up raising just over $10,000. And I will tell you, I thought originally 5,000 was not going to be feasible. I didn't think we'd be able to raise 5,000. And then we hit 5,000 before we even left Milwaukee. And so we said, well, maybe 10, but we will never get to 10. It won't happen. And we raised over $10,000. So it was split between the three organizations I mentioned. The Alliance for the Great Lakes has a basin-wide reach. You know, they do work on every Great Lake essentially. So we wanted to make sure we provided some amount of support to an organization that had that level of reach. And then Urban Ecology Center, like I said, in Discovery World. We ended up having 250 co-walkers and program attendees. So when we did those little programs during the walk, or when we did the day hikes in different communities, we had 250 people come out to those. So that's a lot of people that received direct education from us in person while we were doing the walk. And then when we were doing our posts on social media, and again, it wasn't always just, oh, it's a beautiful day that we're walking today. We tried to incorporate some sort of content, educational content to every post. An average of 7,000 people were reached by every post that we did. So that right there was, in my mind, that we were meeting our goal when we were having that kind of a reach with every post that we were doing. And with our film trailer, we had over 130,000 people reached with the film trailer when it aired. So, and that all happened within 2017 to then 2018. And film editing takes a long time, I've come to learn. And we wanted the film to come out sooner, but it's feature length, so it's about an hour 15 right now. And it just takes a lot of time, and we wanted it to be really good, and everybody was doing it pro bono. So it's probably going to be out within less than a month. So I hope you all watch it, and you'll find it worthwhile and very informative, but we'll hopefully reach more people when that debuts. some of the key takeaways for myself and Alyssa, and that I like to communicate, that I really learned from doing the walk: the power of communication. And I can't say that enough, especially when it comes to science. And, you know, communication isn't just about talking, it's very much about listening as well. I think that it's important that all of us, whether you're an individual that's part of a bird club or you're someone who works in science, we have to realize that we can all take an active role as an educator. You don't have to be a formal educator to help inform those around you and to inform yourself. You know, I've known people that said, well, I'm just a land manager, I don't need to do outreach and education. No, you really should. Like, we should always be, especially in the profession, those of us working in the profession, I think we all need to be taking the opportunity to think about how we can reach people with the importance of the work that we're doing and how they're connected and impacted by the work that we're doing. And I also think it's extremely important just to know your audience. So when you are having a conversation with somebody that maybe, you know, comes from a different background from you, or, you know, maybe appreciates what you appreciate, but for different reasons. I like to use the example of, like, you know, hunters. They may appreciate deer for a very different reason than you do. But you both understand that deer need habitat. You value the deer, but you value the habitat for the same reason, ultimately. But knowing your audience and not being completely turned off of wanting to talk to that person or educate them just because you may come at it from a different value system. We have to recognize that and appreciate that in each other. And then listening too. So much of communication these days, especially with my generation and those behind me, is done through phones and Facebook and social media. And there's a lot of power in those tools. You know, the slides I just presented here displayed that. You can definitely put out very good information on social media, but I don't think it's always the best platform for communication, especially the listening portion. You have to know how to conversate with individuals and talk about issues and help educate people, because they may be resistant to it. And on social media, you often just see people going back and forth and having very unproductive kind of bashing sessions at one another. But we need to learn, especially us young people in science, the younger ones coming in, we have to learn how to talk to people face to face, even virtually like this with, you know, the age we're in right now. But listening is a very important part of that. And then just making science relatable is huge as well. And that can be done through, you know, some of the programs we run at the county through citizen science, just giving people an opportunity to engage in being part of data collection, part of the solutions that we need to start implementing to address some of these conservation issues. That makes it relatable and approachable. When people realize that it's something feasibly that they can have an impact on, they're much more likely to take action. Excuse me. The miles ahead. So what's to come? I think I've already mentioned this, but these are some to continue that on. Just engaging people in science, that makes science visible, and then just share your story. I mean, you're all members of a bird club, so obviously you have a shared interest in birds and environmental issues. Likely talk to people about those things. Talk to people about those things outside of your circle, outside of your comfortable circle zone. I find that, and I found that on the walk, when we would be running into people that would ask us what we were doing, and, you know, well, why would you do that? You know, how did you get into this? Just sharing our story in general intrigued them, and they wanted to know more. And a lot of the people we met on the walk, even when we were in those pubs, I would ask them, after I would tell them, you know, we're walking to bring attention to Great Lakes issues. These are some of the issues and how you can influence, you know, what's going on. And a lot of them I would ask, would you come to a program that said Great Lakes Conservation Program? Like, would you go to a talk about the Great Lakes? And a lot of them would say no, that it wouldn't interest them. But because we were physically there and we were sharing our story, then they were listening. They were intrigued by it. And so there's a lot of power in just talking to people and sharing your story. So I strongly encourage you to do that. And then to come back around, this is one of my favorite quotes, and this is part of my conclusion here. you know, a lot of people always say, well, am I really going to make an impact in just one person, right? I was just curious one day when I was preparing that same keynote speech that I referenced earlier in my talk. I was curious whatever happened to the burrowing owls at my grade school. And so I went online and I started doing some digging. Come to find out that not only are the burrowing owls still there on my grade school playground, but my grade school was actually the first grade school to enroll in South Florida Audubon Society burrowing owl project. So now they have students going out there and actually constructing new burrowing areas on the school grounds for owls. And they put in the fencing around those nests still. So that was extremely encouraging. And there's even a photo on the website that you can see. That's some of the old fencing that my mom and I put up on the school grounds in the background there. And apparently the owls are still right there next to it, but they didn't maintain what we did, but that's fine because they're doing even better things now. But it kind of comes full circle. So don't be discouraged. You as one person can do a lot for the things you care about. So at this point, when I get off the screen here, I do have a link to the trailer for the film. If you haven't seen it, you may have already because it's been out for a while. But since I'm not with you live, I'm going to try to call in live. But since I'll be coming down from Lake Superior, I may not have service. If you have questions, I did put my email address up here. So screenshot it. You can write it down. If you have any questions about the walk, about the documentary, anything Great Lakes related, the documentary will go into a lot more detail about that. Please email me. And what I'm going to do is Alyssa and I, the other co-founder of the walk, we will video record our answers to your questions and we will get them out to your group if I can't join in live, which may happen. So write down my email address, send in any questions that you may have. Thank you all for being here and tuning in. I hope that you found this at least somewhat inspiring, and I hope to connect with you in the future.
Well, thank you, Julia. It was a great presentation. You accomplished a lot in that walk, not just in raising money, but raising awareness. And it was a tremendous feat that the two of you took on. And congratulations. And I hope your blisters and sore ankles have healed to the point where you're enjoying life some more again.
Absolutely. So, thank you.
Thank you again. We enjoyed the program. So, and do come out and visit us at River Edge and the area anytime. We enjoy having you here.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Have a good evening.
You as well.
All right. Good night.
Bye.
Okay, so.
Oh my gosh, I've never had a cough attack like that in a